Closer to the end of day two of the event. We have one last presentation, and that would be on the topic sanctions compliance challenges in the MENA region, which would cover subtopics like UAE stance on sanctions solutions and the extraterritoriality of sanctions. And this will be presented by Mr. Anicet Fantar, the Risk and Compliance Specialist for Dow Jones Risk and Compliance. To quickly introduce Mr. Anicet, he's a risk and compliance specialist at Dow Jones in the Middle East. And Anicet assists Dow Jones customers with their requirements on sanctions screening and third-party due diligence. Anicet has spoken at various conferences in the UAE, KSA, and Qatar, and he's a certified anti-money laundering specialist and a certified global sanctions specialist with ACA. A very warm welcome, Mr. Anicet, to the MENA AML and Fraud Conference. And we would definitely look forward to your presentation going forward. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anil. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Anicet. I'm Risk and Compliance Specialist at Dow Jones, and I'm going to be presenting a session on sanctions compliance in the Middle East region. So if you give me just one sec, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. Okay. Right. So I would like to start with. Okay, oops. Sorry. Yeah. So as Benjamin mentioned in the previous session, the invasion of Ukraine has actually resulted in a complex sanction landscape in the UAE and in the Middle East region in general. The UAE is combating the sanction evasions technique, and it's something that I've researched and pulled together for this presentation. According to an article that was published by the Financial Times earlier this year, the US has called on financial institutions in the UAE to remain vigilant in combating Russian sanctions evasions, as the Western states fear that the UAE and other countries such as Turkey, for example, could indeed emerge as havens for money transferred. The US Deputy Treasury Secretary has welcomed the UAE institution's commitment to preventing money laundering, but also said that the Gulf state, like other global financial hubs, faces the threat of illicit financial flows, and also underscored the need for vigilance and proactive action in combating Russian sanction invasions. It also has been reported that the West has actually shut Russia out of many American and European banks in response to the invasion of Ukraine. And while the UAE has remained neutral in its positioning in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, one way Russians and businessmen close to the Kremlin, close to Putin, have circumvented the sanctions Russia face has been to relocate to the UAE. But sanctions, Russia's economic problems, and the banking restrictions have made things a bit tricky. For instance, there's dozens of Russian private jets that have flown to Dubai, but they're now stuck here as multiple insurance and maintenance providers won't do business with their owners. The free trade zone is also, quite sensitive topic at the moment because it's deemed to be a hub for sanctioned trade. A spokesperson at the Global Financial Integrity has noted that the UAE free zones, for example, post a low number of reports, and this is something that needs to be addressed. Moving on to the next slide. So, as you all know, the UAE has been added to the FATF grey list earlier last year in March 2022. After the listing of the UAE, the UAE Office of Anti-Money Laundering and Counterterrorism Financing has promised to initiate new inspections of institutions with the aim of achieving full compliance with the FATF international standards. And it also has been deemed by the UAE Financial Authority that the grey list was a wake-up call. And at the moment, the central bank is really cracking down, also because senior officials there are actually worried about the reputation. So the UAE is actively building on the significant progress made to date. This is also a statement made by a spokesperson for the AML laundering office. And looking ahead, the UAE will continue to develop its ability to detect, investigate, and understand money laundering and terrorism financing, and advance financial crime compliance framework within the country and around the world. Um, so the question that we could ask ourselves is, following the FATF review of the UAE in 2020, there was a lack of measures the lack of measures in place have brought the UAE on the FATF grey list. Ever since then, financial transactions involving the UAE are subject to increased scrutiny, and the UAE also does not have access to the same level to the level access that it had to the global financial network. The UAE's take on Russian sanctions enforcement is a bit unclear. However, will the FATF remove the UAE from the grey list if the UAE maintain its position? The UAE could decide to implement Russian sanctions, and that would have significant consequences for UAE businesses that do not have access to quality data and to, for instance, direct or indirect sanctions data. Okay. So now talking about the sanction implications for UAE businesses. So extraterritorial sanctions, or the extraterritoriality, as you may know, is the ability of a state to make, apply, and enforce laws, regulation, and other rules of conduct in respect to persons, property, or activity beyond its territory. The US is actually the primary government which is engaged in applying extraterritoriality of sanctions to its sanctions regime. And the EU describes extraterritorial sanctions as sanctions that non-US citizens and companies are also expected to comply with outside of the US jurisdictions. These sanctions are also known as secondary sanctions. So this actually means that the US has built a sanctions regulatory framework whose reach goes far beyond the US jurisdiction and also far beyond US citizens. Secondary sanctions imply that any link a transaction or business relationship may have in the US. It can be as simple as a transaction in US dollars, for instance. And something interesting that I've read in Bill's broader book, Forensic Order, I don't know if you've had the chance to come across it, but it's a really good book, is that every time a transaction in dollars is performed, it goes through a clearinghouse at the Federal Reserve in New York, and therefore the US maintain a history of each and every dollar transactions happening anywhere in the world. Additionally, sanctions have commercial implications too. So like if a transaction involves a UAE firm and a sanctioned party, whether directly or indirectly sanctioned, if someone else notices it before it gets completed, the underlying assets can be frozen, and then potentially any financial flows the UAE firm is expecting will not come. Therefore, it's crucial for business players to have access to high quality information when it comes to sanctions compliance. Amongst all types of sanctions, the ones that are enforced the most in the Middle East are financial sanctions and trade sanctions. And the most effective way to comply with them is to have access to the sanction lists that are published by the Department of Treasury, the UN, the EU, and also pay particular attention in a region where name variation is quite high, like aliases, name variations. And, the reason also why these aliases are also indicated on sanction lists is because it's a regulatory requirement to screen against these names. And this is something that you're able to do only if you have access to structured data information. Okay. So this is, a snapshot of the strengthened regulatory framework when it comes to enhanced due diligence. At the beginning of the summer 2022 last year, there was a new regulation that was piloted by the Ministry of Economy, which includes an an enhanced regulatory framework to supervise banks' exposure to the property sector, and the issuance of guidelines to help licensed exchange houses combat money laundering and the financing of terrorism. The regulator also instructed all Hawala bankers to register, which is an effort to strengthen the oversight of money transfer. And that also shows a willingness to crack down on Dubai being a destination of choice for money transfer funds. The central bank is also fining exchange houses for failing to achieve the appropriate levels of compliance with anti-money laundering regulations. In October last year, 6 exchange houses were fined for non-compliance for a total of almost $5 million. And in July 2022, the Ministry of Economy has distributed 69 fines to the NFPBs for their failure to comply with international regulation on AML and CFT. Okay, so taking a look at indirect sanctions. So on the graph here, you can see our coverage for sanction, which is the line in blue at the bottom of the graph, and then our coverage for indirect sanctions. So indirect sanctions, as you may know, refer to entities not mentioned on sanction lists, but are owned by entities that are. So as per the OFAC 50% rule from 2014, these entities also fall under sanctions regulation. Unlike direct sanctions, this data is not provided by a regulator or published in a list. So it's data that has to be researched and compiled. At Dow Jones, we do daily monitoring of additions and modifications of the sanction lists. We conduct research in local languages, such as Russian, Ukrainian, Farsi, Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, Korean, etc. We source the information from business registries, official gazettes, government web pages, corporate reports, corporate websites, reputable media publications. We use all of that information to support or corroborate official information that is found in corporate report or registries. Even the sanctioned subjects that have no holdings must be researched to confirm the lack of ownership. We're always looking for ways to automate or improve the efficiency of the update process. So the vision for the future, again here I'm gonna quote Councillor Salem Al-Tujani, who's the head of the Investigation and Enforcement Department at the Ministry of Economy, who has indicated that during the July 2022 round of inspections, the most prominent violations committed by inspected company were the failure to develop policies and procedures to combat the crime, failure of the compliance officers to perform duties stipulated by the AML legislation, also the failure to take necessary measures and procedures to identify crime risks in the company's field of work, failure to apply due diligence measures on clients that are politically exposed, the PEPs, failure to conduct due diligence on customers, so KYC, prior to establishing business relationship, and absence of documented procedures for monitoring and reporting suspicious transactions that were also found as part of the inspections. The other violations include the failure to take measure to understand the purpose and nature of the business relationship, failure to take measure for continuous monitoring in the business relationship with customers, and failure to take enhanced due diligence measures to manage high risks. And all of these come in addition to non-compliance with Cabinet Resolution 74 of 2020 regarding terrorism list regulation. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I don't know if we have time or if we need to. I think I'm the last presentation. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anicet, for your presentation and also your valuable time to be spent on this particular conference. I'm sure the attendees would have certain takeaways which can be implemented in their respective organizations. Right. So regarding the questions, I'll definitely connect with you by end of day, maybe once we start receiving the feedback from the audience, and I'll personally connect you with the people who have raised the questions regarding your presentation. All right.
Thank you.
Once again,
Thank you
thanks
very
so
much.
much for being a part of this, and we're definitely glad to be hosting you at this conference, Mr. Anicet.
My pleasure. Thanks a
Okay.
lot.
Thank you. Have a nice day.